Okay, we're talking about inflation. When you have the same number of resources, the same number of things to purchase, and just a whole bunch more money to buy it with, the price is going to go up. So prices go up. The Ottomans used to be able to spend X and buy enough army stuff to defeat the Spanish, and now they have to spend, 2X or 3X uh, to get the same number of armaments. So it just drives down the value of the silver and really depresses the economy. But we're coming to that. Colonialism is the result here, this political conquest of one society by another, followed by social domination and forced cultural change. This begins in the 1450s, the European colonialism, that's one we're talking about. And direct colonialism ends between 1945, the end of World War II, and 1980, once it all got worked out. Neocolonialism takes over in the absence of imperial political domination, persisting relationships of dependency of former colonies on the former ruling states, and their domination of the former colonies. For example, much of Latin America is independent, has been in some cases since the 1820s, but the U.S. continues to wield immense power over the economy and even the politics of those countries. It's called the Monroe Doctrine in the Americas. Nobody can interfere in the Americas except for the United States with their approval. Land is appropriated for cash cropping or mining or cash cropping, ignoring subsistence needs and collective ownership. Uh, Economic development emphasized extraction, and for here I like to look at the coast of West Africa. Um, you can see here uh, the countries here. This is French speaking, this is English speaking, Portuguese, French, English. English is American, French, uh, English. This was originally a German territory, that now it's French. French, English, again, formerly German, and on down. And the interesting thing about these countries is that there's so many that are long and thin. So you have a coastline, and a short coastline, and then a deep dive into the interior. And the point is that in the colonial period, you've got a hinterland with resources, and then you need a port to get it back to the city, back to the colonizing country. So here you have a port. Actually, it was down here in Takoradi back in the day, um, and so you have lots of gold, you have lots of ivory or whatever, slaves, and then after 1807, there's other things, cattle and other lumber, cocoa, etc., and it goes down to this port, and from this port it goes to London. And you have similar stuff coming out of here, but when it hits this port, it's going to Berlin. You have similar stuff here. When it comes to this port, it's going to Paris. And that's the whole point. The whole point is extraction, as we said, and that's why the countries are so long and thin. Extraction, the extraction of natural resources from the hinterland out to that port, and then on to whoever is ruling it from Europe. Cortez defeats the Aztec Empire in Mexico in 1521. Pizarro defeats the Inca Empire in Peru in 1533. By 1592, 100 years later, Spain is one of the most powerful countries in the Mediterranean. They send out these conquistadors who are Spanish military leaders. They give them haciendas, which are agricultural manors in Spanish and Portuguese Latin America. And these haciendas come with encomiendas, the right of the conquistador to the labor of the Indians living on their haciendas. This is basically in the 1500s. They are making the same mistakes that the Romans were making 2,000 years prior. I mean, this is the 1500s. This is this is the early modern period. Shakespeare is alive. This is Queen Elizabeth. We've got science. We've had the Renaissance. We we in terms of scholarship and knowledge, we've greatly surpassed the Romans. But when it comes to economy, we're still making the same mistakes they were 2,000 years prior. It's ridiculous, just insane that we see these people as somehow innovative and smart, and they're doing the same kind of slavery and brutality that the Romans were doing. It's just nuts. What happens in Spain and Portugal? I think a lot of people think that um, that colonialism is really good for the sending country. It's not. It's good for the king, but it's bad for the people. And if you want any example of this, just think of any image that you have of ordinary people in Europe in the 19th century. The height of colonialism is like 1870 to 1920. What was Europe like during that time? Have you read Charles Dickens? To see what London was like. There was filth and disease and violence and cruelty and poverty. Just horrible, horrible lifestyles. You think of your own ancestors. If you're a Euro-American, it's likely that your ancestors fled Europe either as economic refugees or as political refugees. My own ancestors fled Germany. Today, Germany is a paradise. It's a beautiful country and it's very rich and very good, for people living there. But in the 1880s, it was horrible. It was an absolute pigsty. It was filthy and violent, and poor people got nothing. And so that's why they left, right? So this is what happens. This domestic cycle of colonialism. Why was 19th century such a disgusting, filthy, miserable place? Basically, what's happening here is you have the massive inflation, and this produces crisis. And crises always come, right? You're always going to have a crisis. So Junior here is living in a family. He's the oldest son. He's like 12 years old, and Dad is out there working with the horses, gets kicked in the head and dies, right? So Junior has to take over. Junior is 12 and he can't do the work. So Mom says, "Okay, I'm going to go to the family silver, which is a cabinet filled with silver plates and spoons and stuff, and it's a bank. It's money." And so she says, "I'm going to take a plate. I'm going to go and sell it." And she takes it down to town and she sells it. And with the cash she gets, she can buy the labor of a hired man to come and do all the work that Dad used to do for free, and that will get them through it. And so that's year one, and they get through it. And Junior's 13. He still can't do the work of a man. So she says, "Well, I'll sell another plate." But in the meantime, massive ships came from Bolivia, with silver, and now her silver, she has to take 2 plates to go for the hired man, and then she has to take 4 plates, and then she has to take, and there's no 8 plates left, right? So then she sells all the silver, gets Junior up to year 16, and so now he's 16, he's big and strong, or 17, he can work. He gets out there to work, and they have a drought, no rains. And so she's like, "Well, shoot, we're all out of cash, and all the crops failed, but we got to double down and do it next year, and we're not going to be able to to live because we have no money left to buy food, and the food is all dead on the vine. So we're going to go to the bankers, and we're going to borrow this money and put up the land for collateral." And of course, the drought continues for 2 years, and now, boom, it's over. You've lost your land. Mom is working as a maid, and all the younger kids are farmed out to relatives, and Junior's 19. He says, "Well, shoot, I'm not sticking around for this," right? Impoverishment. I'm going to go join the army. So he goes and joins the army, goes to the New World, and does more conquest, expands the empire because he's successful, brings back more silver, which brings more inflation, which drives more families into impoverishment, which produces more desperate young men to go out and do more colonial exploitation. Exploration. So this is just a cycle. This is a cycle of immiseration that leads to greater and greater conquest. The result so the Europeans are really worse off. Result in America, of course, is famine and population collapse. Western European on Africa, we have so much slavery, and then we have slave wars because that's where the slaves are coming from. They're not being kidnapped. They're being raided by neighboring expansionist states, and then sold into slavery. So all of these slave wars are encouraged, and creation of client states to do the conquering and the selling. It's just a mess. So that is the world as it comes to be. We'll pick this up again later, but for now we need to talk about what kind of system this produced, the global economy that we currently inhabit as labor. Remember that unless you have wealth, You know, you're sitting around with $2 million in the bank. $2 million because that yields 5% per year, which is about $100,000, which is a tidy income to play golf on. 50,000 coming off $1 million is not going to be nearly as successful. So where do you get that kind of money? You get that kind of money through inheritance usually, although some people can create that kind of wealth over a lifetime. Um, in any case, so if you're not one of those, if you're not inheriting millions of dollars, you are probably working, and that's where your future income comes from. And so that's what we're working toward on our next video.